faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally Book Talks. Today I'm going to interpret this book called The World of Yesterday with the subtitle Memories of a European. The author is the renowned Austrian writer Stefan Zweig, born in Vienna in 1881. He wrote in German and left behind many popular works, like the novels Chess Story and Letter from an Unknown Woman, plus biographies such as Three Masters and The World of Yesterday. For most of his life, Zweig sailed smoothly, but in his later years, World War II broke out and Europe was engulfed in war again. Zweig was forced to leave Europe and eventually went into exile in Brazil, where he finished The World of Yesterday during his journey. He tried to describe his life objectively, along with Europe's social culture and art back then, to honor his youth and the two world wars. The World of Yesterday is a long-form memoir essay with a recollective nature. For researchers, this work is a key reference for studying early 20th century European history. For ordinary readers, the deep emotions and beautiful prose make it impossible to put down. Now, let's dive into this book. In the opening, Zweig says sorrowfully, "I'm a pacifist, a humanist, but in the world I live in now, there's no peace or humanity to speak of. My hometown is the heart of Europe, Vienna. In my youth, it was free and prosperous, a pinnacle of cultural and artistic splendor. But the war that broke out in 1914 destroyed it. After the war, the country slowly recovered, and my career took off. However, it's now 1940, and as I'm writing this, war has swept across Europe again. My heart's filled with turmoil, teetering on the edge of despair." Zweig saw WWN's outbreak in 1914 as the end of Europe's golden age, and 221's in 1939 as the end of his personal golden age. With the two world wars erupting, the highs and lows of Zweig's fate were tightly tied to Vienna and European civilization's destiny. And Fee next will narrate the ups and downs of Zweig and European civilization in chronological order. First, let's look at the pre-WW1 phase, the early years Zweig cherished most. Back then, his hometown Vienna was also in its golden age. Zweig devoted many pages to recalling the prosperous society and artistic atmosphere of that time. First, let's understand the historical background. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Vienna was the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, formed in 1867 by the merger of Austria and Hungary. Both nations compromised, hoping that 1+1 would be greater than 2, using each other's strength for mutual protection. It could be said that the Austro-Hungarian Empire's political structure was unique at the time. Zweig detailed the peaceful scene of that society. In 1881, when Zweig was born, Austrian citizens generally enjoyed the stability brought by the ancient nation, a tranquil golden age that seemed like it would last forever. Not only did the wealthy live comfortably, but wealth also trickled down to ordinary people. The best proof was the rise of the insurance industry. Workers and servants had reasonable wages and medical insurance, while public health, traffic safety, and infrastructure all improved, significantly reducing poverty. Austrians took pride in these achievements. Of course, this included Zweig himself, as Vienna was becoming the world's recognized cultural capital. This city gave birth to Haydn, Beethoven, Mozart, Schubert, Brahms, Johann Strauss, classical music masters shining like stars. And music made Vienna gentle and elegant. In the city, even ordinary people tried to attend performances at the Royal Theatre, learning elegant speech and refined tastes from the actors. Viennese felt little for politicians, merchants, or tycoons, but worshipped actors, writers, and artists. A Beethoven concert could bring audiences to tears. An hour after the performance ended, people still refused to leave. The birthday commemoration of a famous actor became a major event, overshadowing all political affairs. When the old theater that premiered Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro was demolished, people gathered as if at a funeral, hoping to grab at least one fragment of the stage floor. As precious mementos, Vienna's coffeehouses nurtured countless cosmopolitans. Here, just by spending a little money on coffee, one could learn everything happening in the world. As soon as two people started discussing a new idea, a third and fourth would quickly join in. Every writer, artist, new book, and exhibition immediately caught attention because folks were eager to be first discussing something novel. A poet, barely 20, could become wildly famous. Even an ordinary literary journal, every author featured would be remembered by attentive readers. Zweig noticed that beneath the prosperous social order lay suppression and confinement of youth and women. For instance, state authorities deeply distrusted the younger generation, especially in education. In 1886, 5-year-old Zweig started primary school before moving to secondary school. Zweig was bright but utterly detested school. The place reeked of forced indifference and boredom. Learning meant rote memorization, turning students into cold machines. Zweig said in 8 years, not one teacher ever asked what he wanted to learn. All teachers lectured from high podiums and left immediately after. Even the school architecture was old-fashioned and gloomy, with dim lighting. In summer, windows got curtained to block views. Feared students might daydream seeing blue skies. The state craved stability, rejecting youthful energy, molding students into composed, restrained citizens. That's how Zweig's father's generation became steady bourgeois figures. Back then, anyone ambitious had to appear older than they were. Newspapers ran beard growth tips. 20-somethings wore gold-rimmed glasses and grew beards. Some even cultivated slight bellies to project dignified maturity. Society demanded young women be refined, yet completely ignorant. For example, women learning about sex too early were deemed immoral and unchaste. If unmarried by 25, a girl faced slim marriage prospects. She'd then be expected to remain chaste lifelong, maintaining respectable decorum. Now, consider Zweig's upbringing. His wealthy family ran a large textile factory. Their family lived modestly. Even after becoming a millionaire, Zweig's father smoked ordinary domestic cigars. When traveling, he rode in second-class train carriages. Not until his 50s did father take mother on a luxurious trip. They spent a winter in Nice, France. Both of Zweig's parents were Jewish and highly cultured, and at that time, Jews faced no trouble or discrimination. Father played piano beautifully, had elegant handwriting, and spoke German, English, and French. Mother came from a prominent banker's family with exquisite taste. Zweig noted that while Jews pursued wealth passionately, the whole family took pride when someone excelled in music, history, or arts. In such an environment, Zweig naturally fell in love with literature and art. Though Zweig found Vienna's schooling stale, thankfully the broader city society offered escape. Folks frequented theaters, museums, bookstores, and universities, places alive with literature and music, bringing unexpected joy that brightened their school days. Zweig said in any class, if one person loved art, others caught the passion instantly. If someone collected stamps, a whole group of enthusiasts emerged around them. Mention a dancer's charm, and crowds rushed to the opera house for opening night. Every class was a cultural hub. For instance, Zweig's classmates were fervent art lovers. The grade above Zweig debated socialism and Tolstoy. Zweig skipped classes to explore museums, exhibitions, symphony rehearsals, antique hunts, and cafes. Literature and art know no borders. Embracing them rapidly broadens horizons. During these years, Zweig brimmed with optimism. I became a socialist, feeling incredibly hopeful about both personal and Europe's future. He experimented with writing and befriended Vienna's great poets, Hofmannsthal and Rilke. He wandered freely through libraries, museums, galleries, and theaters. As a Jew, Zweig deeply cherished the comfort, safety, and cultural belonging Vienna gave him. While neighboring Germany expanded militarily for European dominance, Austrians ignored politics, basking in their artistic refinement. Immersed in art, Zweig believed this feast would never end. Any flaws would gradually vanish. During this golden phase, Zweig traveled through Vienna, Berlin, Paris, and Belgium, building connections that launched his literary career. In 1898, 17-year-old Zweig entered university as a philosophy major, but devoted most time to literature and art. Zweig's literary path started smoothly. He began publishing and secured a spot at the prestigious Neue Freie Presse, becoming a regular contributor. By 1900, this role let him transfer to Berlin, living his dream bohemian life. In Berlin, he mingled with drunkards, addicts, ex-con artists, all enriching his worldview. Later in Brussels, Zweig saw himself not as Austrian, but as a German language writer and European. His concept of home expanded. The pinnacle of this freedom brought him to Paris. To him, Paris was paradise. Like Vienna, Berlin, and Brussels, he claimed visiting Paris then guaranteed lifelong happy memories. In Paris, you could live lavishly or simply, laugh loudly or reflect alone, socialize or enjoy solitude. Streets buzzed past midnight, workers and bosses mingling as equals. Parisian women's intellectual freedom showed true respect and liberation. This starkly contrasted Vienna's conservative gender norms. After Paris, Zweig journeyed through England, Italy, Spain, and the Netherlands. Around 1904, 23-year-old Zweig returned to Vienna, rented an apartment, and focused on writing. By then, he'd befriended Europe's foremost literary and artistic minds, and like poets Rilke, Verhaeren, and Demel, writers Romain Rolland and Gorky, philosopher Freud, sculptor Rodin, around Zweig, any acquaintance might be a cultural giant, their descendant, relative, or neighbor. These friendships made Zweig see Europe like a passionate lover. But as the bourgeoisie thrived across nations, cities expanded one after another, people's energy surged, all wanting grander achievements. Instead, they started misusing that energy. France sought colonial expansion. Austria aimed to annex Bosnia. Even weaker Bulgaria eyed Turkey. Germany, lacking direction, prepared for major conflict, tension mounting. This atmosphere spread across Europe. Zweig wrote with near remorse, "I am a writer." But before 1914, like other pacifist writers, Verhaeren, Romain Rolland, we worked alone, never uniting to warn Europe awake from its dream. Worse, we completely misjudged the situation. We thought progress and optimism would unify Europe, letting nations share civilization's fruits. Instead, European nations became enemies. As an ancient Chinese saying goes, thrive in adversity, perish in comfort. For pre-WWI Europeans, this couldn't be truer. In 1914, WWN began, starting Zweig's second life phase. During this time, he witnessed true war, exiled abroad, then returning home. When war broke out, Austrians enjoyed half-century peace and knew little of conflict. The ordinary folk imagined war as a romantic short trip, a passionate, heroic adventure. In August 1914, youth eagerly enlisted, cheering on trains to their doom, shouting to mothers, "We'll be back by Christmas!" Terrible empire-fevered, veins pulsing with crimson blood. Yet Zweig, then just over 30, resisted this patriotic frenzy. Instead, he committed to preserving European culture. He closely corresponded with Romain Rolland, initially wanting to organize a peace gathering of cultural celebrities from various countries, but unfortunately, it didn't succeed. Afterwards, Zweig found an opportunity to go to the front lines. At the front lines, he saw the wounded in agony, desperate soldiers, people crammed into cattle cars, swaying unsteadily, the carriages reeking of foul stench. At the war's start, Vienna's duchesses and noble ladies pretended to be nurses, posing for photographers in white ambulances. But at the front, Vehicles transporting the wounded were dilapidated, truck windows shattered, lighting from soot blackened oil lamps, makeshift stretchers covered in blood-stained rags. The wounded, pale and sweaty, moaned constantly, struggling to breathe in pungent smells of urine, feces, and iodine. This brutal reality sharply contrasted with the media's overwhelming optimism and fervent patriotic rhetoric. However, the military authorities needed this intense patriotic fervor and required artificial incitement. This incitement work was usually done by writers, journalists, and others. At that time, almost all intellectuals obediently served war propaganda to incite public war frenzy. Zweig thought his friends were steadfast, but overnight they became fervent patriots. The great poet Rilke, forced into service, told Zweig, "If you can go abroad, go abroad. War is always a prison." Zweig wrote bitterly, "Those who still spout optimistic talk are either blind or morally corrupt." Later, people finally understood what war truly was, not charging at enemies with colorful silk bags, but spending weeks in trenches and camps, covered in lice, constantly at risk of being blown apart by distant gunfire, and airplanes would bomb sleeping women and children into pieces. By then, the German-Austrian armies had collapsed, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire no longer existed. Inflation, shortages, and massive unemployment made life hard for most people domestically. Dwight, exiled abroad, decided at this moment to return to Austria during its hardest times. In Switzerland, while transferring trains, Zweig witnessed the departure of the Habsburg royalty who once ruled the Austro-Hungarian Empire, alongside a group of former nobles, all with awkward, humiliated expressions, as if attending a funeral. The Habsburgs' Austro-Hungarian Empire, passed down for centuries, died in that very minute. Everyone in this desolate scene reflected on world history. Zweig realized the homeland he'd returned to was now a different Austria, a different world. Earlier, Zweig had bought a villa in Salzburg's mountains, intending to live reclusively. No, this house offered shelter, a historic building, yet leaky and freezing from neglect. Zweig said, for 3 months yearly, he wrote articles huddled under blankets. The worst was severe domestic hunger, bread black, potatoes rotten, Kronen worthless, letting Swedes, French, British, and Dutch swoop in for bargains. Later, Germany set up border checks to confiscate Austrian goods. But one thing bypassed restrictions: beer swallowed into bellies. So Bavarians crossed borders, guzzled beer in Austria, then noisily boarded trains home. Ironically, post-WWI, when Austrian Kronen stabilized and German marks crashed, Austrians flooded Germany to chug beer. Repeating the farce, Zweig said this grotesque scene laid bare those years' madness perfectly. Amid chaos, Zweig deepened his devotion to art. She insisted on occasional trips to the city for opera. Tickets cost a fortune. One ticket's price once covered a year's private box. Actors looked haggard but gave their all. Zweig sensed fierce will to live. In 1917, America joined the war while Russia saw February and October revolutions. New Soviet Union exited, ending WWI. 8. Meeting old friends, Zweig felt everyone had matured through war. In Florence, an old friend strode toward him, suddenly embracing so tightly his wife thought him assaulted. Post-war people felt more genuine to Zweig. She felt everything had changed utterly. Zweig hoped European nations would seize this rebuilding chance to forge a true community where no one wanted war. From 1924 until 1933, when Hitler rose to power, this relatively peaceful decade saw Zweig become a star author. His work sold millions, translated into French, English, Italian, Spanish, with countless readers across Europe. After just days away, he'd return to mountains of fan mail, invitations to lectures, conferences, and ceremonies everywhere. Now, Zweig had everything possible for an artist: wealth, fame, friendship, freedom. He knew nearly all Europe's great artists personally. His Salzburg villa hosted countless celebrities, he secured an invitation to visit the Soviet Union. During those years, he collected priceless manuscripts, Balzac's novels, Napoleon's orders, Da Vinci's notes, plus musical scores by Bach, Haydn, Brahms, each worth a fortune. Inspired by pre-war prosperity memories, Zweig created his own golden age in his villa, but war didn't end as he'd hoped. OVWI was older European politicians' mistake. Post WWI, these men lost youth's trust, faced contempt. Young people vowed to control their fate and abandon old ways. Thus, they embraced unprecedented rebellion. Men shaved beards clean. Homosexuality became trendy among youth, not for love or desire, purely to defy the past. This made them easily fascinated by those leading rebellion calls. Post-war disillusionment and rebellion were too intense, too easily exploited by new ambitious figures. In Italy, 1922, when Mussolini's fascists took power, none foresaw the storm they'd unleash. In Germany, Zweig's second home, apocalyptic chaos reigned. The German mark plummeted. A newspaper cost 50,000 marks in mourning. By evening, 100,000 marks fixed one window, costlier than a house before. A shoelace cost more than a luxury store. Zweig sent the manuscript to the publisher. For safety, he demanded immediate prepayment for 10,000 copies royalties, but by the time the check arrived, its value had dropped to less than the postage. A week earlier, law became useless and morality was ignored. Speculators ran rampant everywhere. The unemployed rioted daily. Idle men and women danced provocatively in the streets. Students who dropped out competed to learn scams and deceit. The German people have always had a tradition of valuing order and discipline. So at this time, whoever could bring so-called order would likely be embraced by the people. You've probably guessed the rest of the story. Hitler's rise to power. By this time, Zweig was world famous, his books reaching countless households. After Hitler came to power in 1933, he immediately tried to incite university students to attack a group of famous writers and artists, then ban their works. Among them was Zweig, banned simply because he was Jewish. This was a devastating blow out of the blue. Zweig was jolted awake from his dream once again. His book sales plummeted, and soon his personal safety was threatened. In October 1933, Zweig was forced to leave Austria for Britain. After that, he never returned to his home in Salzburg. In London, he kept an eye on the worsening situation in continental Europe while continuing to travel across the Atlantic to America multiple times, wanting to see more of America and South America, gathering impressions and experiences for the dark times ahead, trying to restore his faith in humanity. He had already concluded that Europe would fall once more, with no idea how long it would last. European civilization was great and brilliant, but the more so, the greater the risk of its destruction, and the more severe the consequences. Zweig's personal situation mirrored Europe's. The higher and smoother he flew, the more inevitable the pain of his fall. The final chapter of The World of Yesterday is titled The Agony of Peace, describing the last moments before Europe's civilization sank. Zweig saw Europe as completely one with himself. If the 1914 war destroyed his beautiful memories, this current war left him without hope for the future. By 1940, Zweig was nearly 60, seeing the shadow of another great war, World War II. In the book's final passages, his tone is almost confessional. He admitted, "I feel the world is regressing entirely. People are experiencing a period where freedom is completely lost, but I myself remain unchanged, always refusing to believe disaster has truly struck, always seeking new places to retreat into my beloved books and artworks, waiting for the storm to pass." The memoir stops in 1940. With The World of Yesterday, Zweig comprehensively reviewed his life, honestly dissecting himself and the eras he lived through. Though it recounts much joy and glory, showing repeated shifts between optimism and pessimism, hope and disappointment. The overall tone remains pessimistic and somber. The title, The World of Yesterday, carries a farewell meaning. In Zweig's writing, the future no longer belonged to him. And in his eyes, the future didn't belong to Europe either. Zweig eventually went into exile in Brazil. Um, on February 23rd, 1942, he and his wife took poison together at their residence. Zweig left a brief suicide note. In the letter, he told friends, "I couldn't wait any longer. I've decided to go first." We can view this memoir, The World of Yesterday, as the full version of that suicide note. In this book, we encounter a sensitive and nuanced writer's feelings for his European homeland, his love for its splendid culture, art, and landscapes. He also reflected deeply on the two wars, grieving that he couldn't save his homeland from ruin. Zweig left the world with regret, yet his The World of Yesterday is beloved worldwide, radiating lasting charm in literary history. All right, that concludes our interpretation of The World of Yesterday. The reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.